A new era of high-tech crime fighting has apparently arrived. It is called DNA testing or genetic fingerprinting. What it means is a suspect can now be identified from DNA left behind in hair roots, skin, blood, or other body fluids. The key factor here is that everyone, except for identical twins, has a unique DNA pattern. The testing is already having an impact in court. It was the pivotal evidence in the conviction of a Florida rapist. It was Orange County, Florida, Assistant State Attorney Jeff Ashton's idea to use the genetic fingerprinting. Also with us is Paul Ferrara. He directs the state of Virginia's Bureau of Forensic Science. Just last week, a Virginia court decided to allow DNA test results as evidence in a murder trial. Welcome, Jeff. Paul.
Thank you.
Tell me about the Virginia, what are the ramifications of this? No, hold on, let me rephrase that. What are we talking about, DNA testing? Because it is not, we all know that this whole, we've begun to hear the word DNA some 10 years ago, but when it became so significant in terms of understanding our own makeup, cellular makeup. Now you're talking about using it. What do we mean by DNA testing?
Well, in the cases that we're discussing, we're seeing the application of this technology, which has been around for a number of years, to forensic evidence, to assisting law enforcement and prosecutors in prosecuting cases. The DNA, which is our genetic
code,
blueprint,
right,
code, which makes each and every one of us individual, is now being used to identify individuals with a degree of specificity hitherto unknown in conventional forensic science, with the possible exception of fingerprints.
Okay, let me come back. Let me go to the Florida case. What happened in the Florida case?
Well, in our Florida case, we had a series of rapes that occurred in one particular part of Orlando, Florida, where I practiced. They were all similar, a similar time of night, basically a situation where a black man would break in at knife point and rape the women. Normally he would do it in the dark, or he would cover their faces, so identification was next to impossible. We had isolated or caught one guy we thought was the man that did it, and we charged him, but the evidence we had was not that strong. We had some eyewitnesses identifying him, but it was dark and the opportunity to see him was brief. We had one case where we had a fingerprint on the outside of one of the victim's houses that was his print, but we couldn't tell how it got there or when it got there. So we used DNA in those cases to positively identify this one individual to the exclusion of everybody else as the rapist.
How did you use it? What matched up?
What we did was we took a sample from the victim, a sperm sample from the victim.
Right.
And
so in the semen...
The semen left by the rapist.
Left by the rapist.
Right.
You had a sample of that.
Right, which was taken the night of the rape.
Right.
And we took that and compared it to the blood that we took from the defendant, Mr. Andrews, and matched up the DNA, and they matched perfectly.
And it was introduced in evidence?
Introduced in evidence in the first trial in November for one victim, and then a second trial in February for a second different victim, similar kind of case.
How long have we had this technology, the capacity to do this?
The application to forensic evidence is relatively new, 2 to 3 years. It was first developed in England by Alec Jeffreys and applied in a rape case in England, I think it was 1985. And since, its use is proliferating in this country and across the world.
But we've had the technology, the capacity to do it for a couple of years.
Yes.
To take the sample of the DNA,
right,
so that we can make it a comparison.
And particularly in terms of isolating it from evidence left at a crime scene. Instead of pristine, clean clinical samples in a clinical research laboratory, now we're applying this technique to dried seminal fluid stains or blood stains.
Even after they've been over how long a time? I mean, is there a time in which, in seminal fluid, that it's no longer usable?
One of the beauties of DNA is that under proper conditions, a well-preserved, dried sample of tissue or blood, the DNA can remain intact and be analyzed a number of years later, even.
Wow. If you were representing someone in which the evidence, you were on the defense side, and the evidence, and the prosecutor was using DNA, and in fact it seemed like it matched your client, how would you try to argue that this was not a valid, admissible evidence and not foolproof and therefore ought not be used?
It would be very difficult. It was very difficult for the attorneys in our cases. Their basic argument, which is really the only one you can make, is just that because it's new, that maybe it shouldn't be trusted. As the jury's indicated in our cases, that's not a very good argument. But really, that's the only thing you can say, is that it's new and maybe that it has not been tested as much as it should. But of course, you know, my opinion is the opposite, because I think it has been. That's really the only argument you can make.
You agree with that? I mean, is it foolproof?
When it's properly conducted by properly trained personnel and using proper facilities and standards and techniques, foolproof would be a reasonable description.
I mean, the only argument you really have is that they didn't get that sample from you know, that they haven't been accurate in measuring that this is the very same DNA, or B, that my DNA was there for some other reason. Right?
That's about all you have to fall back on.
But why has it taken so long for it to be adopted by criminal justice?
Well, in the United States, the first laboratory to offer this test just started offering it in the beginning of last year, 1987. Mm-hmm. Up until that point, it was in the experimental stage. The technology has been around for a number of years, but thankfully the scientists have been cautious about developing it, testing it, verifying it over years and years of research to make sure that it works.
Because they weren't sure that each DNA was unique? Because I thought that's been around for a while. That idea, that scientific fact is not new. What made them unsure?
Well, I don't think so much that they were unsure. I think it was just that since they understood the importance of it, they wanted to make absolutely sure that it was what it appeared to be.
How is it going to change the system?
It's going to revolutionize. It's going to revolutionize the work done in forensic laboratories. Hitherto, most of the evidence developed, analyzed in forensic laboratories, crime laboratories around the country, was more corroborative in nature and circumstantial. With the exception of fingerprints, they didn't really point to individuals. Now, a person, a perpetrator of a crime, leaving any biological fluid, whether it be tissue under the fingernails of the victim, or hair, or blood, or seminal fluid, he can be identified.
He or she has left their stamp.
Yes. It's, some people say it's like leaving a Social Security number.
Thank you both very much. It is an extraordinary development in criminology. Nightwatch continues. Back in a moment.
Still ahead on Nightwatch, catching criminals with TV. Eric Engberg finds out about the startling success of America's Most Wanted.
Adventures of Nick, a teen, and his quest for a date to the Smokey Robinson concert.
You really light up my life.
And you're, like, really darkening my doorstep.
Okay.
Strike one.
I've got seats to Smokey this Saturday.
Sorry, Nick. I'm already dating this really cute ball player.
Strike two.
I'm burning for you, babe. How about
you talk to that female butthead and leave me alone?
What a drag.
Strike three. You're out. Don't be a butthead.
Working in Latin America isn't everyone's idea of how to spend their retirement. But not everyone's like Peace Corps volunteer Virginia White. Her lifetime of experience has given new life to this community. Water to once arid fields, produce where crops never grew before. She's helping people to help themselves and others. No matter what your skill, you don't know how much you have to offer until you offer it, and then reap the rewards. Peace Corps, the toughest job you'll ever love.
What price are you willing to pay for a great tan? Premature wrinkles? Saggy skin? Skin cancer? Or a few dollars for a bottle of sunscreen? It's your choice. Fry now. Pay later.
Son, I figured when you were old enough, I'd talk to you about drugs. I'd tell you they're nothing but poison. Tell you to stay away from the garbage that pushes that junk. Only I never figured that I ought to be telling that to a 13-year-old.
If you don't teach your kids to say no to drugs, it's as good as saying yes